Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. On May 10th, China and the United States held trade talks in Switzerland, with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, China's trade lead, meeting U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Bessent. Foreign media, citing analysts, pointed out that this round of dialogue is more likely a temporary measure aimed at seeking a truce in the trade war, rather than a peace negotiation moving toward a comprehensive resolution of differences. Meanwhile, in an effort to bolster its own position, the United States made a high-profile announcement before the talks that it had signed what it called its first tariff trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Behind all the fanfare, this agreement is in fact only a framework, with no substantive document signed yet, and the specific details are far from being disclosed. Even so, the White House continues to tout this unfinished agreement as a victory and is attempting to use the maintenance of a 10% tariff on the UK as an example to set rules for other countries engaged in trade negotiations. The Financial Times quoted sources in the trade and diplomatic sectors as saying that behind this UK-US agreement lies a calculation aimed at the Chinese supply chain. According to the report, the agreement includes strict security clauses imposed by the US on strategic sectors such as British steel and pharmaceuticals, requiring these industries to quickly meet US demands regarding supply chain security and ownership of production facilities in order to qualify for US tariff exemptions or preferential policies. The report states that although on the surface this clause applies to all third countries, British officials admitted to the Financial Times that Trump has already hinted that China is his intended target. Former British trade official Ellie Renison mentioned that when former US President Biden lifted steel tariffs on the UK, he also requested to see an audit report on a Chinese-owned steel company in the UK. She sees Trump's move as an escalation of U.S. efforts to curb China's role in global strategic goods supply chains. Washington wants the UK and others to share critical data, ultimately cutting trade ties with China, especially in sensitive sectors like steel, she said. If the final US-UK deal shows the UK aligning further with US anti-China trade policies for tariff relief, China will likely retaliate. According to the Financial Times, regarding the content of this agreement, the opposition Conservative Party criticized the Labour Party for allowing Washington to have veto power over the UK's supply chain. However, Prime Minister Starmer's government refuted this, saying that the accusation is completely groundless. Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, insisted in an interview that there is no veto power over Chinese investment in this trade agreement, nor is that the purpose of the agreement. Another official, however, defended the US measures, arguing to the Financial Times that the UK's tariffs would be much lower than those in other parts of the world. The reason the US is doing this is because it does not want the UK to become a place where other countries or companies can circumvent US export regulations. Some diplomatic sources have further pointed out that these so-called security clauses reached with the UK could become a template for the United States to pressure other allies into excluding China from key supply chains, coercing the UK and other allies to reduce trade and investment cooperation with China in sensitive areas. Sam Lowe, the head of trade at a consulting firm, said that he expects the relevant provisions in the US-UK agreement may be replicated in trade agreements with other countries, especially export hubs in Southeast Asia such as Vietnam and Cambodia. Two EU trade officials involved in the negotiations told the Financial Times that because EU member states are divided on their China policy and it is difficult to reach a unified position, such China-related provisions could hinder the progress of trade talks between the EU and the US. It will be very difficult for the EU to agree to economic security requirements like those in the US-UK agreement. To briefly summarize, first, the inclusion of content that meets US security requirements in this framework is to be expected. It was already clear during the Biden era that the US wants to control its allies and have them follow its anti-China maneuvers. Previously, this was mostly done behind the scenes, but if it now becomes part of a trade agreement, it will serve as a useful tool for the US to manipulate its allies. Second, China saw through the US's tactics a long time ago. China has already made it clear earlier that any agreement between the US and other countries or economies must not harm China's interests. This means that if, upon review, the US-UK agreement is as reported by foreign media, China will take countermeasures against the UK. Third, this framework between the UK and the US also shows why China cannot make concessions to the US. because the US not only wants to save its own economy, but also aims to cut China off completely, seeking to exclude China entirely from the global supply chain. Fourth, although this is the US's intention, whether it can actually achieve it is another matter. However, China still needs to fight back, because otherwise it would allow the US to set a bad precedent. On a practical level, foreign media have also noted that it will be difficult for the EU to follow the UK's lead, because different countries have varying degrees of economic ties with China, and if China retaliates, the development of the entire country could suffer a severe blow. In fact, some EU member states have already begun to reconsider their relationship with China and are looking to strengthen cooperation. Last week, the Iberian Peninsula and surrounding areas in Europe experienced the most severe large-scale power outage in nearly 20 years. Spain, Portugal, and parts of southern France were plunged into darkness, and countries such as Andorra and Belgium were also affected, with the lives of tens of thousands of people directly impacted. According to foreign media reports, this power outage has triggered reflection on the resilience of Europe's power grid and its energy policies. The South China Morning Post quoted analysts as saying that this large-scale blackout is likely to become a turning point in European energy policy. They pointed out that governments are beginning to realize that, given the increasingly important role of renewable energy in the power supply mix, the urgent need to upgrade the grid is now pressing. Analysts further pointed out that this major power outage in Europe may become an important opportunity for Chinese companies to enter the European energy infrastructure market. As a leading global supplier of energy storage and power grid construction technology, China's achievements in related technology research, development, and application play a key role in preventing large-scale blackouts and ensuring the stable operation of the power grid. During this major blackout, Spain at one point announced it would enter a state of emergency. The European Union has already ruled out the possibility of a cyber attack. According to the preliminary report from Spain's grid operator RE, this major blackout may not have been caused by a sudden surge in power supply. Large-scale blackouts can be triggered by a sudden and significant drop in electricity supply. Financial Times pointed out that this large-scale blackout once again exposed the vulnerability of Europe's power grid. Reuters also mentioned that although Spain is striving to shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, its power grid and storage capacity are far from keeping pace with the rapid development of renewables. IEA analyst Lopez called the event a stress test for Europe's zero-carbon grid transition, exposing weaknesses in flexible dispatch and storage. Experts and analysts emphasize that in an era where electricity supply is increasingly reliant on new energy sources, energy storage is crucial for helping the power grid cope with sudden fluctuations in electricity supply. Due to the lack of adequate energy storage facilities to support renewable energy, many European countries, including Germany, France, and Spain, have experienced negative electricity prices multiple times in recent years, where power producers have to pay users to consume electricity. To address this situation, building new energy storage facilities is often considered the most effective solution. Morales, the climate policy manager at the Spanish think tank Renewable Energy Foundation, pointed out that Spain's need to expand its electromagnetic storage capacity is particularly urgent. He told the South China Morning Post, "We need to leverage various Chinese technologies to improve our power grid. I believe that what we truly need from Chinese companies right now is energy storage technology. Spain is in urgent need of enhancing its own energy storage capacity." According to the latest annual report released this March by the European Association for Storage of Energy and Research Consultancy LCP Delta, Europe will add 11.9 gigawatts of new energy storage system capacity in 2024, bringing the total installed capacity to 89 gigawatts. Although the report highlights that 2024 is a record-breaking year for energy storage deployment in Europe, by comparison, China's investment in energy storage technology is much greater. According to incomplete statistics from the Zhongguancun Energy Storage Industry Technology Alliance's Global Energy Storage Database, by the end of 2024, China's cumulative installed power energy storage capacity surpassed 80 gigawatts for the first time, reaching 137.9 gigawatts, a year-on-year increase of 59.8%. New types of energy storage refer to various forms of storage technologies other than pumped hydro storage. They are important technologies and fundamental equipment for building new power systems, and also serve as crucial support for achieving carbon peaking and carbon neutrality goals. Simply put, this kind of energy storage technology is like a giant power bank. It can store surplus electricity generated from new energy sources such as wind and solar power, and then release this electricity back to the grid during peak demand periods, effectively solving the problem of instability in renewable energy generation. The South China Morning Post has noted that in February this year, 8 departments, including China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, promoted the market development potential of new types of energy storage. China is exploring the integration of new energy storage solutions into a broader power grid so that they can be applied in scenarios such as peak load management and frequency regulation. At the same time, China's leading position in electromagnetic energy storage and grid construction solutions has provided Chinese renewable energy giants with another potential growth area in the European market. In 2024, Chinese storage firms secured over 146 overseas orders, totaling 165.47 gigawatt-hours, with 81.11 gigawatt-hours in battery orders and 72.98 gigawatt-hours in 97 system orders. Chinese firms signed over 12 gigawatt-hours of European storage deals this year. On May 7th, during an expo in Munich, Germany, 2 energy storage companies, Chuneng New Energy and Hanfu Energy, signed cooperation agreements with partners from the UK and Bulgaria involving orders exceeding 2.5 GW. Electrical expert Proda Lovic believes that Chinese brand products are highly competitive and in certain fields they are simply the best on the market. He added that it is certain Chinese companies will have a place among the many solutions being introduced in Spain. In conclusion, China has already seized a leading position in many emerging industries. For both developed and developing countries, cooperating with China means access to the world's most advanced production capacity. In contrast, the United States is clearly lagging behind and resorts to improper means to hinder China's development, as well as to obstruct other countries from cooperating with China, hoping to drag the whole world into decoupling from China as the US has done. However, the era when the United States could cover the sky with one hand is already over.